Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Zingason. Today is August 27th, the main news at this moment. I'll start perhaps with the most painful news for the Botox jellyfish in recent months. The armed forces of Ukraine have liberated part of the territory and re-entered the Luhansk region. I think that right now, in the underground casemates of the Kremlin, the bald one is just pounding with all his pseudopodia at once in a fit of rage. Ukrainian troops have seized the initiative in the sector north of Lyman and have begun to reclaim previously occupied territories. And this is where another unpleasant situation begins for the Russians. Ukrainian units have wedged themselves between the settlements of Nova and Katarinivka, creating a threat of semi-encirclement for the Russian grouping in this area. Even Russian military bloggers admit that control over this salient is being lost, and the supply routes for ammunition, personnel and food are coming under Ukrainian fire control. For the Kremlin, the fully occupied Luhansk region was for a long time almost a sacred achievement, the only region that Moscow could claim to have captured in its entirety. Now even this showcase is falling apart. Ukrainian troops are reclaiming positions near the region's border and demonstrating that no Russian occupation is final. Putin is being told that the Donbas will be captured soon, but the exact opposite process is happening here, so the bald scarecrow is losing part of his main prize. And apparently, this caused such a stir somewhere in the General Staff that the Chief of the General Staff, Gerasimov, was forced to film his visit to the headquarters of the southern grouping at Mosfilm. They draped some studio with camouflage netting again, and there Gerasimov read from a piece of paper, I quote, "The offensive of Russian troops is proceeding at an undiminished pace in all directions." Listen, I always ask one simple question. If you have an offensive going on in all directions at an undiminished pace, then why were you standing near Kiev in 2022? And 4.5 years later, you are already losing part of the Luhansk region that you occupied? I will remind you that the Russians claimed they had completely occupied the Luhansk region back in July 2022. When the Russian army was near Kiev in 2022, almost 27% of Ukraine's territory was under occupation. This includes Crimea and parts of the Donbas that were occupied before the full-scale invasion. Today, Russia controls approximately 19% of Ukraine's territory. That means Ukraine has liberated 44,000 square kilometers of its territory during this time. That is an area the size of Denmark. So who is advancing and where? Well, here is some more good news. Meanwhile, in Russia, another war criminal has been blown up in a car. This happened in St. Petersburg. An extremely interesting character there has gone off to a concert with you-know-who. I will tell you about him right now. But first, a reminder. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It is important. You can do it right now without delay. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda, and together we will be much more effective at doing so. So make sure to subscribe. So another Russian military officer has been blown up in his own car. In the area where this happened, a significant portion of the housing was purchased by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation for military personnel and their families. So this criminal military officer died on the spot. His legs were blown off. Well, here, literally one leg is here and the other is there. Local publications write that he held the rank of lieutenant colonel. And there is also information that he was a pilot for the Russian Aerospace Forces. Well, in general, good riddance to that ghoul. We'll find out exactly who this was in the near future. Judging by everything, he was a very important pilot. And I just remembered, this is a VKS pilot, but everyone seems to have forgotten about the VKS commander, about General Chaiko. Remember, on August 1st, there was an explosion at the Baltsi Rossi restaurant in Moscow. He was planning to celebrate his jubilee there, 55 years old, and I thought, let me check, maybe this ghoul of a commander has surfaced somewhere. Let me remind you, he is the one responsible, among others, for the missile attacks on Ukraine. You know what the most interesting thing is? There is no General Chaiko, there is no VKS commander. Since August 1st, not a single photo, not a single video that could confirm he is alive. He disappeared somewhere. Hey Chaiko, where are you? Russia may strike British targets in response to strikes by the armed forces of Ukraine on the Russian Federation. This was stated well by the Foreign Ministry representative Zakharova. Well, according to her, a retaliatory strike could be launched, let me quote, against any military targets in the UK, in Ukraine and beyond its borders. Whoa, wow, are you serious? Previously, London simply announced on Ukraine's Independence Day that it had allowed the transfer of secret data on SEKLP missiles for their production in Ukraine so that Ukraine and France could produce them here in Ukraine. And Zakharova also stated that Britain and France are playing with fire. And cluck, 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 and woof, 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 added Zakharova. And you know what's interesting? Zakharova already voiced almost the exact same threat on May 7th, 2024. And what has happened since then? Did someone strike Britain, perhaps? No. Come on, let Medvedev out of his kennel already. His threats are somehow more interesting. Medvedev recently showed a list of enterprises in Europe that he intends to strike. I'll show you now. He'll get worked up. Medvedev will go into his kennel in the Kremlin courtyard to beat up a globe. Take that, you cursed Europe. Well, and Ukraine, as we can see, is performing a simply incredible feat, fighting against such a huge army of ghouls. It is simply incredible. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we are continuing the fundraiser for a pickup truck for the strike UAV crew of the 26th Artillery Brigade, which is holding the defense in the Donetsk direction. Please watch this video.
Вітаємо! Ми бійці 26-ї окремої артилерійської бригади. Звертаємося до Бориса Тізенгаузена та вашої аудиторії з проханням допомогти зібрати кошти на авто для екіпажу ударних БПЛА. Будемо дуже вдячні Борису та кожному, хто підтримує наш збір. Кожна гривня – це внесок у нашу роботу, а значить, в нашу спільну боротьбу. Дякуємо за підтримку. Слава Україні!
Let's help our warriors. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There is Mono, Privat, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. And there is a QR code in the corner in case you happen to be watching me on another channel. I'll just remind you that our artillerymen regularly send greetings to the occupiers. And every greeting from our artillerymen of the 26th Brigade is something the Russians remember once and for all. So let's help our warriors. 2 logistics warehouses were attacked in the Russian Federation today. Ozon logistics facilities in Orenburg and Ufa were hit by drone attacks. No large-scale fires have been reported. I understand this was just a test run. In general, you can already order an obituary for these 2 Ozon logistics facilities. Strikes on the Russian economy and military budget will continue. Everything will burn. And here is confirmation. All major Lukoil refineries have stopped due to drone attacks. Reuters reports. All 3 of Lukoil's largest refineries in Russia have stopped. The last one was the North Sea plant in Kostovo, which was attacked yesterday. It is the 4th largest refinery in Russia overall and the 2nd in the Russian Federation, in terms of gasoline production. After the attack, oil refining there was halted. That is to say, in Russia, they still do not grasp the full scale of the catastrophe, but the second wave of the fuel crisis that has swept over the regions has turned out to be much more serious, and it will get even worse. Before this, let me remind you, on August 21st, the Lukoil Perm refinery completely shut down, and the Volgograd refinery halted processing on July 31st. Now let's calculate the total scale just from these 3 halted refineries. These 3 enterprises together processed 41 million tons of oil per year, approximately 113,000 tons per day. But what's more important, of course, is to look at it in terms of fuel output. In normal operation, this trio could produce 9 million tons of gasoline and over 16 million tons of diesel annually. This is roughly a fifth of Russia's production for each of these types of fuel. Compensating for such volumes is simply impossible. In other words, Russia is losing major refining capacity. But it cannot keep up with repairs. It is losing them faster than it can repair them. And have you noticed, by the way, that there is no information about fuel supplies from India or Morocco? There is information about fuel supplies from Belarus, but that is something a bit different. So why is there no such information? Perhaps other countries decided to supply Russia, to save it, to extend a helping hand? No, the system failed. Indian fuel turned out to be twice as expensive as Russian fuel and didn't even make it to the gas stations. And secondly, even these measures of fuel from India or Morocco do absolutely nothing to save them from the crisis. It's a drop in the ocean for Russia. Now, a little more about the CIA director's visit to Moscow. Most experts, however, agreed that the purpose of the visit was a warning not to escalate the situation against NATO countries. Some even linked the intermediate delivery of a C-17 aircraft to Riga with the idea that a provocation might be being prepared specifically against Latvia. Well, indeed, the landing in Riga was not a routine refueling stop. It turned out that the CIA director's plane arrived in Riga on August 23rd, spent almost 2 days there, then flew to Moscow and returned back. Therefore, this hardly looks like a simple refueling stop. And here is an interesting question that arises. What if the mobilization in Russia is not being prepared for a war with Ukraine at all? The fact that mobilization is being prepared in Russia, I think, is already clear to everyone. Well, it is generally accepted that Putin intends to mobilize an additional 300 to 500,000 Russians in order to push the situation in the Donetsk region to the limit, to destroy another 500,000 Russians, to ruin them, but to capture the entire Donbas. But who said that sending hundreds of thousands of these mobilized troops, who by the way are poorly trained and even less motivated, is guaranteed to help capture the Donbas completely? I mean, just overwhelming them with meat assaults like that, well, it's not a given that it will succeed in capturing the entire Donbas either. And what if the plan is something else, to take these 300,000 and send them to one of the Baltic states? I mean, it's clear that such preparations cannot go unnoticed. But another scenario is possible. They might start something. For example, they are conducting exercises somewhere near the border right now. They might start something again under the guise of exercises. And then suddenly, just like when they entered here from Belarus back then. Is such a scenario possible? Quite possible. Many are writing that this is suicide. Putin won't go against NATO. That's irrational. But wasn't it irrational to attack Ukraine? And continuing to fight for several years after the failure of the blitzkrieg on Kiev, that was also irrational. Fighting right now is irrational, yet he continues. He is wrecking the economy, wrecking his own country, wrecking Russians, losing allies and markets, but he continues. So it's obvious that such a scenario is also possible. And the most important thing, the most important question in this whole topic is the arrival of the main NATO military forces to help the armies of the Baltic states guaranteed? That is the question that arises. An invasion of one of the countries by a large Russian grouping could indeed give Putin some kind of quick, visible success. Like, look, we invaded NATO, we captured some part of the territory there, and they didn't do anything to us, we are great, and so on. Perhaps this very prospect was the topic of Red Cliff's negotiations in Moscow. What do you think about this, by the way? Write in the comments. And also about what kind of fascist regime Ukraine is fighting against right now. A Russian court has upheld the 15-year sentence of 70-year-old Ukrainian woman Svetlana Loy, a resident of the temporarily occupied Tokmak in the Zaporizhzhia region. Do you know what Ukrainian woman Svetlana Loy was accused of? Of helping the Ukrainian army on Ukrainian territory? She was accused of high treason. In February, the Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia Regional Court sentenced Svetlana Loy to 15 years in a general regime penal colony, followed by 1 year of restricted freedom after her release. Moreover, the case itself was effectively heard in a single session. And on August 25th, the first appellate court in Moscow refused to change the verdict. The hearing was held behind closed doors. Journalists were only allowed in for the reading of the verdict. Before the judge began reading the verdict, the 70-year-old Ukrainian woman sang the famous Ukrainian song Ridna Mati Moya, My Dear Mother. 15 years in a penal colony for helping her own army on her own land. But Svetlana did not give up even in court. Just imagine, the woman is 70 years old. What a person. You understand, she realizes that in all likelihood she will not survive this imprisonment. And yet she still showed the Russian fascist regime that she has not given up. A very strong woman, and I think Ukraine will do everything to free her. God grant her health, and may she see Ukraine's victory and get out of these fascist dungeons. Well, and the fascists continue to terrorize Ukraine today. At night, there was a ballistic missile attack on several regions, and some hit us here in Kiev. Since the morning, they've been terrorizing Kiev with jet drones. Honestly, it's getting really tiresome. These drones are circling over Kiev, constantly buzzing, whistling, flying back and forth. I take it this is a new tactic the Russians have. We are currently preparing a number of interesting means to shoot down jet drones. I think we'll be hearing about that in the near future. Patriot performed effectively against the ballistic missiles today. The missiles have finally arrived. Thanks to everyone involved for the fact that Ukraine now has something to shoot down Russian ballistic missiles with. Well, there is information today that about 5 Russian drones flew into Moldova during today's attack in Ukraine. Some returned to Ukraine and some disappeared from radar. Perhaps they crashed somewhere, ran out of fuel. And one more piece of news, the cherry on top, well, a melon, a giant watermelon on the cake. Crucial details have emerged regarding yesterday's strike on occupied Donetsk. Yesterday, the Ukrainian Air Force Aviation carried out successful missile strikes on the main and reserve command posts in occupied Donetsk. More than 12 air-launched cruise missiles were used to hit the targets. We already know about 2 targets, and these are targets, real big ones. Target number 1, 6 missiles hit a 2-level underground parking lot that was being used as a command post for the Russian military group. The missile strike hit the area of the Donetsk city shopping mall. The shopping center itself sustained damage, but the primary target was the unfinished residential complex located nearby. The missiles used were those designed to penetrate bunkers. That is, 6 missiles hit practically the same spot, penetrated the floor slabs, and struck the room inside, deep within the parking garage. It is interesting that this complex where the Russian command post was located was built by the company of Yanukovych's son, the eldest son. According to the project, there were supposed to be 20-story buildings there, as well as an underground parking garage for 600 cars. But after the occupation, construction was not completed. In short, the Russian world arrived, and it's understandable. But this huge reinforced concrete parking garage turned out to be a practically ready-made underground bunker. There are 2 levels, several exits, large interior spaces, equipment is stationed there, generators, communication devices, personnel, and so on. In short, after the strike, when the missiles penetrated deep into that bunker, the surrounding streets were urgently cordoned off. Locals wrote that they were carrying out dozens and dozens of stretchers from that parking garage. In general, some whole, some in pieces. The evacuation of the wounded and killed continued for several hours. And then information appeared about an urgent collection of a large amount of blood for the Russian occupiers. The command posts of Russia's 51st Combined Arms Army were hit. Its units are operating in the Pokrovsk, Dobropilya, and Kostiantinivka directions. The destruction of such a facility could indeed temporarily disrupt the command and control of Russian troops across several sections of the front at once, especially if senior officers and communication specialists were inside at the time of the strike, and they were there. Our forces struck after they had confirmed that they were there. Pushilin, the head of these occupation authorities, is squealing like a piglet, shouting, "They hit with scalp, scalp e.g. hit, what is this, what is happening?" But that's not all. Another strike was carried out on the building of the former Ufa masse. This building was constructed back in the late 60s. It housed the Design and Technology Institute and contained a shelter for the Research Institute's employees. After 2014, the building was occupied by Russian invaders and repurposed for their military needs. Well, they converted it into a headquarters, which is exactly why this facility became the target of another strike. It appears that there was an alternate command post here. In short, they fragmented high-ranking Russian occupiers along with their command posts. Wonderful news. And one more piece of unpleasant news for old man Kabayev. Ukraine is strengthening the defense of the Donetsk region with 2 updated troop groupings. They will be commanded by 2 of the most perhaps well-known Ukrainian commanders, heroes of Ukraine Denis Prokopenko, Radis, and Andriy Biletsky. Prokopenko currently heads the 1st National Guard Brigade Azov, which includes 5 brigades. He is one of the leaders of the defense of Mariupol and Azovstal, and Biletsky commands the 3rd Army Corps, which was created on the basis of the 3rd Assault Brigade. His units are holding a section of the front about 150 kilometers long. In general, the exact composition of the groups and their areas of responsibility are not disclosed, and rightly so. But the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Brovdy, call sign Madyar, has already stated that both of these structures will be fully synchronized with drone units. That is, on one of the most difficult sections of the front, where Putin plans to take the Donbas, Ukraine is effectively assembling 2 powerful management teams around Prokopenko and Biletsky, commanders with extensive combat experience. Well, this is an attempt to make the defense of the Donbas more cohesive, probably more technological, and most importantly, faster from the detection of a Russian assault to its complete defeat. That's the news for today. And you friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. And let's help our warriors from the 26th Artillery Brigade. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone. Glory to Ukraine.